Hello everyone, and welcome. Today, I want to walk you through what the Supreme Court's recent ruling on presidential immunity really means, why it matters for your money, and how it could shape the markets and our institutions for years to come. I'll keep this fast, simple, and focused, so stay with me to the end and think about how you'd answer the question I'll ask you there. Let's start with the big picture. When the rules at the top of government change, markets pay attention. This new Supreme Court decision about former President Trump isn't just about one person or one case. It's about how predictable our system is. Markets don't panic over who wins or loses in politics as much as they react to uncertainty. Clear rules help money flow. Unclear rules make investors cautious. The court has now drawn a new line. Presidents can have immunity for official acts, but not for personal actions taken for private benefit. That sounds simple, but here's the catch: the gray area in between. What counts as official and what counts as personal is not always obvious. In business terms, it's like telling a CEO, you're protected when you act for the company, but not when you act for yourself, and then leaving the details fuzzy. That fuzziness creates legal and political risk, and both of those feed into market risk. To understand how we got here, let's rewind the timeline a bit. On January 6, 2021, the normal process of peaceful transfer of power was disrupted at the Capitol. Regardless of anyone's political views, the constitutional steps are clear. Congress certifies, power transfers, and the system moves on. That day, much of that process broke down. The next day, January 7th at about 2:15 p.m., major business leaders across the country started publicly distancing themselves from what happened. That wasn't random. That was the market's leadership doing real-time risk assessment. Is the system still trustworthy? Then came reports of attempts to influence election officials in certain states. In any system, political or financial, when tools of power are used for personal gain rather than institutional duties, people stop asking, is this effective leadership, and start asking, is this legitimate? When legitimacy is questioned, long-term risk goes up, even if prices don't crash overnight. Now fast forward to the Supreme Court ruling. The court laid out a three-part framework. Official acts get immunity, unofficial acts get no immunity, and a middle zone of official adjacent acts has to be judged case by case. That middle category is where the trouble lies, because different judges can interpret it differently over time. In markets, whenever rules are open to wide interpretation, it becomes harder to forecast outcomes. Harder forecasting means more caution, more hedging, and sometimes slower growth. At 10:14 a.m. on decision day, the court released its long opinion. One key idea is this: a former president is not automatically immune from criminal prosecution for actions taken in office if those actions are alleged to be criminal and are not protected official acts. That's a big shift in how we think about executive power and accountability. If you think of America as a giant corporation, this is like we're writing the rules for what the CEO can be held personally responsible for after leaving the job. Now, watch how the markets responded. When the ruling came out, the Dow moved less than 0.5%. The next morning at 9:30 a.m., the markets opened slightly down, then recovered by midday. That pattern tells us something important. Investors had already priced in the chance of a mixed ruling, and they believed the system would handle it in an orderly way. That's a sign of cautious confidence in the institutions, not blind optimism. Legally, the next steps are fairly clear. The case goes back to lower courts. Judges there will decide, allegation by allegation, what counts as an official act, what counts as unofficial, and what falls into that murky middle. Some charges may be blocked by immunity. Others will go forward. This is not a clean yes or no outcome. It's a messy matrix of possibilities. And as those decisions unfold, they will create precedent that shapes how future presidents behave. This is where the financial angle gets sharper. Every time the rules for top leadership change, it affects how decisions are made, how documents are kept, how advisors are chosen, and how risk is managed at the highest level. Think about what happened in corporate America after the Enron scandal and the Sarbanes-Oxley law. More controls, more documentation, more personal responsibility for top executives. It felt heavy at first, but over time, it increased trust in financial reporting. A similar shift may now happen around presidential decision-making. We've seen before how markets behave during political shocks. During Watergate, markets were shaky at first, but eventually stabilized as the system showed it could investigate, hold hearings, and transition power. During the Clinton impeachment, markets basically kept climbing because the underlying economic and institutional machinery kept working. The lesson is simple: markets care more about whether the system functions than about who is in the headlines. The real risk isn't just one ruling or one trial. The deeper risk is erosion of trust when citizens and investors start believing the rules are applied inconsistently or that some people are effectively above the law. When that belief sets in, it doesn't always show up in one dramatic crash. It shows up in slower investment, higher risk premiums, more political tension, and more volatility over time. Right now, Congress and investigators are adjusting their strategies to this new framework. Former officials are being called to testify under different legal assumptions. Lawyers are recalculating which arguments still work and which don't. These moves are happening while we approach another election cycle. That means legal timelines and political timelines are now colliding, which always adds another layer of uncertainty. But there's an important point I don't want you to miss. For all the tension, the system is still using its built-in channels: courts, hearings, opinions, elections rather than force or chaos. In business terms, this is like a stressed company that still follows its shareholder rules, audit processes, and legal procedures instead of breaking them. That doesn't mean everything is healthy, but it does mean the core structure is still doing its job. From a leadership and accountability standpoint, this ruling sends a clear message: presidents need freedom to act for the country, but not a blank check for personal benefit. That's very similar to what we expect from corporate leaders: protection when they act in good faith for the organization, and exposure when they act for themselves at the organization's expense. Accountability is not a punishment by default, it's a performance control. It nudges leaders to think twice before stepping outside the rules. Looking ahead, every future president will operate under this new understanding of immunity. That will shape how they approach controversial decisions, how they communicate with staff, and how they weigh the legal risks of actions that mix politics, personal interest, and official duty. In a way, this is an institutional evolution, not a full-on revolution. The system is adjusting the boundaries rather than tearing them up. So where does this leave you as an investor, a business owner, or just someone planning for your family's future? It comes down to three key ideas: predictability, trust, and engagement. Predictable rules reduce risk. Trust in institutions supports long-term investment. And engagement voting, staying informed, speaking up helps keep those rules and institutions accountable. When people turn away in frustration, the cost eventually shows up as more instability and fewer opportunities. We are living through a rare moment where constitutional law, politics, and financial stability are all tied together. This ruling is not just about what happens to one former president. It's about what future presidents think they can or cannot do, and how confident markets feel that the rules will be applied fairly over time. That's why this matters to you, whether you follow politics daily or try to avoid it. As someone who has watched markets and institutions bend, but not break through wars, recessions, and scandals, I see this as a stress test of American governance. The key question isn't will things get messy, because they already are. The key question is, can the system process this fairly, transparently, and predictably? If it can, markets will adapt and move forward. If it can't, we pay the price through higher uncertainty and weaker growth. So let me end with this: you are not just a spectator here. You are a stakeholder. Your savings, your business, your job prospects, and your children's opportunities all depend on how stable and trustworthy the rules of the game are. Civic engagement and financial discipline are not separate worlds, they are two sides of the same coin. Stable institutions support strong markets, and informed citizens help keep institutions stable. Now I'd love to hear from you. Do you think this ruling will make future presidents more careful and accountable, or just more cautious and political? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, because your perspective actually helps shape what we explore in future videos. And if you found value in this breakdown of how a major Supreme Court decision connects to your financial future, consider subscribing once so you don't miss upcoming insights on where law, politics, and markets intersect and what it all means for your money.